Welcome, traveler of the night hours. You've found your way here to this quiet place, this space between waking and sleeping, between the known world and the realm of dreams. Perhaps you've come seeking rest, or perhaps you've come seeking something else, a story, a voice in the darkness, a companion for these deep hours when the world seems to hold its breath. My name matters little. You may think of me as the keeper of these tales, the one who gathers stories from the shadows and whispers them into the night. I've been collecting these narratives for longer than I care to remember. Dark tales, yes, but not the kind that jolt you awake with terror. No, these are different. These are stories that understand the particular magic of darkness, the way it can be both frightening and comforting, unsettling and soothing, all at once. You see, there's a paradox at the heart of what we're doing here tonight. We fear the dark, and yet we seek it out for rest. We're drawn to stories that unsettle us, that make our hearts beat a little faster, that remind us of all the things we don't understand about this strange world. And yet these very stories, when told in the right way, can ease us into sleep more effectively than any gentle lullaby. Why is that? I've pondered this question for many years, through many long nights. I believe it's because these dark tales acknowledge something true about our experience of being human. They don't lie to us. They don't promise that the world is entirely safe, entirely knowable, entirely under our control. Instead, they invite us to make peace with uncertainty, with mystery, with the vast unknown that surrounds our small islands of light and understanding. When we listen to these stories in the deep night, something in us relaxes. Not because we're frightened into submission, but because we're finally acknowledging what we already know in our bones. That life is strange, that the world is full of mysteries, that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophies. And once we acknowledge this, once we stop fighting against it, we can rest. These stories I'll share with you tonight are what I call dark tales, but darkness, you must understand, is not the same as evil. Darkness is simply the absence of light, the space where our eyes cannot see, where our rational minds cannot quite reach. In darkness, we're forced to rely on other senses, other ways of knowing. We must trust and surrender. And isn't that exactly what we must do to fall asleep? Each tale tonight has been chosen carefully. They're stories that unfold slowly, that build atmosphere like fog rolling in from the sea. They're narratives that understand the value of ambiguity, of questions left unanswered, of mysteries that remain mysterious. Some are ghost stories, some are tales of psychological unease, some blur the line between the supernatural and the simply strange. All of them are designed to draw you deeper into that liminal state between waking and dreaming. I should tell you what to expect in the hours ahead. We'll journey through several stories, each one a window into a different shade of darkness. Between these tales, I'll offer you moments of reflection, interludes where we can pause, breathe, and contemplate what we've experienced together. These moments are just as important as the stories themselves. They're spaces for integration, for allowing the narrative to settle into your consciousness like silk drifting down through dark water. You don't need to concentrate hard on every word. In fact, I'd prefer if you didn't. Let these stories wash over you like waves. If your attention drifts, if you find yourself floating in and out of the narrative, that's exactly right. These tales are meant to be experienced in that dreamy, half-conscious state. They're designed to speak to the part of your mind that's already beginning to dream. I've structured our time together to move progressively deeper into the night. The first stories will be more vivid, more engaging. As we continue, the tales will become more dreamlike, more abstract, more like the thoughts that drift through your mind in those moments just before sleep takes you completely. By the end of our journey, my voice itself will become softer, slower, merging with the silence until there's no clear boundary between the story and the dark. Now, before we begin our first tale, I want you to settle yourself. Adjust your pillows, arrange your blankets, find that perfect position of comfort. Let your body grow heavy. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow, the way your shoulders sink into the mattress, the gentle rise and fall of your breath. The world outside this room, with all its concerns, its demands, its bright urgent claims on your attention, can wait until morning. Right now, there is only this, the darkness, the story, your breath, and my voice. The darkness around you is not your enemy. It's a friend, an ancient friend, older than our species, older than any of our clever inventions and bright lights. Darkness is where we came from, and it's where we return each night. It's the canvas on which dreams are painted, the space in which our unconscious mind can finally speak without interference from our waking intellect. These stories honor that darkness. They don't try to banish it or explain it away. Instead, they invite you to explore it, to discover that the darkness contains not just fear, but wonder. Not just danger, but possibility. Not just endings, but transformations. So let us begin our journey together into these dark tales. Let the first story rise up from the shadows like mist from a midnight sea. Listen, but don't strain to listen. Rest, but remain aware. Sleep, but keep dreaming. And know that I'll be here with you, a voice in the darkness, guiding you through these strange territories until at last you drift beyond words entirely, into the deep country of sleep. Are you ready? Then close your eyes, or leave them half open, gazing softly into the darkness. Let your breathing slow and deepen. And let me tell you about the Lighthouse Keeper, and the last entry in his log. The Lighthouse Keeper's last entry. The lighthouse at Kethwick Point had stood for 147 years when Thomas Cranach became its keeper. It was not a prestigious position. The lighthouse was old, its mechanisms somewhat antiquated, and the point itself was far from any shipping lanes of real consequence. Ships that came near Kethwick Point were usually lost, or nearly so, and Thomas often went weeks without seeing another human being. He'd applied for the position after his wife died. The solitude, he thought, would suit him. He was 53 years old, weary of the world and its people, and the prospect of spending his days and nights with only the sea and the light for company seemed not lonely but peaceful. A kind of retreat. A place to be quietly sad without bothering anyone or being bothered in return. The lighthouse came with a cottage attached to its base, 3 rooms that smelled of salt and creosote. There was a narrow bed, a stove, a table, and a chair that faced a single window overlooking the rocks and the restless gray water beyond. On his first evening, Thomas sat in that chair and watched the sun descend into the sea, and he thought, yes, this will do. This will do nicely. His duties were simple. Maintain the light. Keep the mechanisms clean and oiled. Monitor the weather. Record anything unusual in the log. Every 2 weeks, a boat would come with supplies and mail, though Thomas received no mail. He'd send back his log entries and his requests for provisions, and the boat would leave again, and Thomas would return to his solitude. The lighthouse log was a massive book, leather-bound and thick, its pages filled with the handwriting of a dozen previous keepers stretching back over a century. Thomas read through many of these entries during his first weeks at Kethwick Point. Most were routine, weather conditions, ships sighted, minor repairs completed. But occasionally there were stranger notes. October 17, 1889. Heard singing from the rocks tonight. Could not determine source. No ships visible. March 3, 1902. The light attracted something large in the water. Could not discern its nature. It remained visible for approximately 2 hours before submerging. December 25, 1923. Knocked on the door at midnight. No one there when I opened it. This has happened 3 times this week. Thomas smiled when he read these entries. Solitude plays tricks on the mind, he knew. He himself had already experienced a few odd moments. The sense of being watched, the feeling that someone had just left a room he was entering, a whisper that might have been wind or might have been something else. These were the natural consequences of isolation, nothing more. The brain, starved for stimulation, creates its own. The first month passed peacefully. Thomas fell into the rhythm of lighthouse keeping. He rose with the dawn, made his breakfast, performed his maintenance tasks. He walked the rocks during low tide, collecting shells and sea glass, observing the patient violence of the waves against stone. He read books, the same 5 books over and over, until he knew passages by heart. He tended the light, watching it sweep across the darkness, imagining the comfort it might bring to some distant sailor. And every night, before sleeping, he wrote in the log. His entries were even more mundane than those of his predecessors. October 4th, clear skies. No vessels observed. Replaced wick and east-facing lantern. October 5th, fog and morning, clearing by noon. Strong winds from northwest. No incidents to report. But on November 7th, something changed. Thomas was in the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse, adjusting the lens, when he saw something in the water. It was late afternoon, the sun already sinking, the sea taking on that particular color it gets just before dusk, a deep blue-gray that seems to contain all the sadness in the world. And there, perhaps 100 yards from shore, was what appeared to be a person floating face down in the water. Thomas's heart clenched. He grabbed his binoculars, focused them with shaking hands. Yes, definitely a person. A woman, it looked like, in a long pale dress, her dark hair spreading around her head like seaweed. Not moving. Not swimming. Just floating, rising and falling with the swells. He was down the stairs and out the door in minutes, scrambling over the rocks toward the water's edge, trying to figure out how he might reach her. The tide was coming in, strong currents swirling around the rocks. He had no boat, no way to reach her except to swim, and he was not a strong swimmer. But he couldn't just watch someone drown. He couldn't. He was about to plunge into the water, clothes and all, when he looked up and realized the figure was gone. Simply gone. He scanned the water frantically, binoculars pressed to his eyes, but there was nothing. No body, no disturbance in the water, nothing at all. Could she have sunk? But there'd been no struggle, no sudden movement. She just vanished. Thomas stood on the rocks as darkness gathered, water soaking his boots, and felt the first whisper of unease. He told himself it had been a piece of driftwood, perhaps, or a dead seal. The light had been uncertain, the angle deceptive. But he knew what he'd seen. He knew. That night, he wrote in the log, November 7th, thought I observed a body in the water at approximately 4:30 p.m. Upon closer inspection, nothing found. Likely driftwood or marine debris. Weather clear, seas moderate. He added the last sentences to make the entry seem more ordinary, more rational. But when he lay in bed that night, listening to the waves and the wind, he couldn't shake the image of that woman floating in the water, her hair spread like dark seaweed, her pale dress billowing around her. 3 nights later, there was a knock on his door. Thomas was sitting by his stove, reading by lamplight, when he heard it. 3 distinct knocks, deliberate and firm. Rap. 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 He froze. The boat wasn't due for another week. No one ever came to Kethwick Point. It was miles from the nearest town, accessible only by boat or a long, treacherous walk along cliffs. "Hello?" he called out. His voice sounded strange in the small cottage, too loud and too uncertain. No answer. Just the wind, and the distant rhythm of waves. Thomas stood slowly, walked to the door, hesitated with his hand on the latch. "Who's there?" Silence. He opened the door. There was no one on the threshold. No one on the rocks. Nothing but darkness and the beam of the lighthouse sweeping overhead, again and again, illuminating nothing but empty stone and empty sea. Thomas stood in the doorway, cold air washing over him, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, genuine fear. Not sadness, not grief, not weariness, but fear. His heart was hammering. His hands trembled. He closed the door, locked it, returned to his chair. But he didn't read any more that night. He just sat, listening, waiting for the knocks to come again. They didn't. In the log, he wrote nothing about it. After that night, things began to accelerate. Thomas would wake in the darkness and hear footsteps on the stairs leading up to the lantern room, slow, measured footsteps, ascending. But when he went to investigate, there was never anyone there. He'd see figures standing on the rocks at twilight, but when he looked through his binoculars, they'd vanish. He'd hear singing, just as that keeper in 1889 had heard singing, wordless melodies that seemed to come from the sea itself. And every few nights, there would be knocking on his door. Always 3 knocks. Always at night. Never anyone there when he opened it. He stopped sleeping well. He'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the old lighthouse, wondering what was happening to him. Was it madness? Was isolation finally breaking his mind? Or was there something genuinely wrong with Kethwick Point, something that previous keepers had also experienced but been too afraid or too proud to report? He thought about leaving. The 2-week boat was due in 3 days. He could send a message that he was resigning, that he needed to return to the mainland. But what would he say? That he'd heard footsteps? That someone knocked on his door? They'd think him mad, or weak, or both. So he stayed. And things got worse. One evening, as he was climbing the stairs to tend a light, he smelled something, a scent that stopped him cold. Perfume. His wife's perfume. That specific floral scent she'd always worn, that he'd smelled on her clothes and her hair and her skin for 26 years of marriage. It was impossible. He'd been here for over a month. The smell couldn't linger that long, and besides, she'd never been to this lighthouse. She died before he'd even heard of Kethwick Point. "Emma?" he whispered into the darkness of the stairwell. No answer. Just the fading scent of flowers and the creak of the old building settling. That night, Thomas made a decision. He would document everything. Everything strange that happened, every odd sound and inexplicable sight, he would record it all in the log. If he was going mad, so be it, at least there would be a record. And if something genuinely strange was happening at Kethwick Point, well, future keepers deserved to know. He began writing longer entries, more detailed entries. He described the knocking, the footsteps, the figures on the rocks. He wrote about the woman he'd seen floating in the water. He wrote about his wife's perfume on the stairs. He filled page after page, his handwriting growing more frantic, more urgent. And then, on November 23rd, he saw her clearly. It was just after midnight. Thomas was in the lantern room, making his regular check of the light. He turned to descend the stairs and she was there, standing on the landing just below him. The woman from the water. She was exactly as he'd seen her, pale dress soaked and dripping, dark hair hanging in wet tangles around her face, her eyes. Her eyes were open. They looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not anger, not sadness, not anything he could name. Just looking. Just seeing him see her. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His breath froze in his lungs. They stood there, keeper and ghost, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. And then she spoke. "Why didn't you save me?" Her voice was like water running over stones. And she was gone. Thomas staggered backward, nearly fell down the stairs. His heart was racing so hard he thought it might burst. He gripped the railing, gasping, trembling, feeling the entire world tilt and spin around him. When he could finally move again, he descended the stairs on shaking legs and went directly to the log. His hand trembled so badly he could hardly hold the pen, but he wrote. He wrote everything. What he'd seen, what she'd said, the terrible feeling that had washed over him when he looked into her eyes. And then he wrote something else, something that surprised him even as he penned it. "I know now what I must do." What did he mean? He didn't know. Not consciously. But some part of him, some deep part, understood something his rational mind couldn't quite grasp. The supply boat came the next day. Thomas gave the crew his log entries and his supply requests as usual. They asked if he was feeling all right. He looked thin, they said, exhausted. He assured them he was fine, just adjusting to the solitude. They left, and Thomas watched their boat disappear into the gray distance, and felt a strange sense of finality, as if he were watching his last connection to the ordinary world sail away. That night, he didn't tend the light. For the first time since arriving at Kethwick Point, he let it go dark. He sat in his cottage, at his small table, and wrote his final entry in the lighthouse log. It was long, several pages, and it detailed everything he'd experienced. But the last paragraph was different. It wasn't a description or a record. It was something else. The log was found 2 weeks later, when the supply boat returned and found the lighthouse dark and Thomas Cranach gone. His cottage was neat, as if he'd cleaned it carefully before leaving. His coat and boots were missing. There were footprints leading down to the water's edge, but they stopped at the rocks. No body was ever recovered. The final entry in the log, dated November 24th, has puzzled maritime historians for years. It reads, in part, "I understand now that some debts cannot be paid in the world of the living. I saw her drowning and I did nothing, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. I told myself it might not be real, might be driftwood or a seal, anything but what I knew in my heart it was, a person dying while I watched. That moment of hesitation, that failure of courage, has created something that cannot be undone." She asks why I didn't save her, and I have no answer except that I was afraid. But fear is not an excuse. Fear is never an excuse. The lighthouse has shown me that there are depths to this world I never imagined, depths that are not on any map. And I understand now that I must go down into those depths, down into the dark water where she went, and finish what I failed to begin. Perhaps there, in the cold and the dark, I can finally give the answer I should have given on that afternoon when I stood on the rocks and watched her drown. To whoever reads this, tend the light. Keep it burning. Others need it more than you know. And if you see someone drowning, even if you're afraid, even if you're not certain, jump. Always jump. The alternative is worse than any cold water or riptide. The alternative is this: knowing you stood and watched while someone needed you, and then living with that knowledge until it becomes unbearable. I won't fail her twice. The entry ended there. No signature, no final thoughts. Just that last line, and then blank pages afterward, waiting for the next keeper's hand. Long pause. The sound of waves continues, gradually fading. The lighthouse at Kethwick Point stands still. It has a new keeper now, and the light burns every night as it should. But sometimes, sailors passing in the darkness report seeing two figures standing on the rocks below the lighthouse. Two figures, standing close together, looking out at the sea. And sometimes, very late at night, the keeper, whoever the keeper happens to be, will hear 3 knocks on the door. Rap. 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 As if someone is checking in. As if someone wants to be sure the keeper is still awake, still vigilant, still watching the water for anyone who might need saving. The new keepers never write about these things in the log. They've all read Thomas Cranach's final entry. They know what happened to the man who let fear stop him from acting, and then let guilt drive him into the sea. So they write about weather and waves and passing ships, and they keep the strange things to tea. But they tend the light faithfully. They never let it go dark. And when they see something in the water, they always investigate. Always. Because fear is never an excuse. Thomas Cranach taught them that. His last entry taught them that. And on very quiet nights, when the wind is right and the sea is calm, some keepers swear they can hear singing from the rocks. 2 voices, intertwined, wordless and strange. One asking and one answering, both at peace now, both released from their separate darknesses into something else, something that exists in that deep place where the ocean holds all our sorrows and all our failures and somehow, mysteriously, transforms them. Section 3. Interlude: The Nature of Darkness. Let's pause here for a moment, you and I. Let's take a breath together in this darkness between stories. How are you feeling? Your body, is it still settling into rest? Perhaps your mind is partially lost in the story we just shared, still standing on those rocks with Thomas Cranach, still wondering about the woman in the water, and what it means to fail someone and then have to live with that failure. That's alright. Let the story linger. Let it move through your consciousness like tide through channels in the rocks. Stories like the Lighthouse Keeper's tale work on us in ways we don't always understand immediately. They're not puzzles to be solved or moral lessons to be extracted and examined in bright light. They're experiences, atmospheres, emotional landscapes we pass through. And what we take from them isn't always clear, even to ourselves. I want to talk to you for a few moments about darkness itself. Not the darkness in stories, but the darkness around you right now. The darkness in which you're listening to my voice. The darkness that humanity has feared and sought shelter from for our entire existence as a species, and yet the darkness we return to every night when we close our eyes and surrender to sleep. There's a particular quality to darkness that's difficult to articulate. It's not simply the absence of light, though that's the technical definition. Darkness is its own presence, its own substance. When you're in darkness, you're aware of it. You feel it around you. It has weight and texture. Darkness is full, not empty. And darkness changes us. In darkness, we become different people. Our other senses sharpen. We listen more carefully. We become aware of our breath, our heartbeat, the movement of air against our skin. We become attuned to subtleties we never notice in bright light, when our vision dominates everything else. Darkness also changes how we think. In darkness, memories rise more easily. Imagination becomes more vivid. The boundaries between what's real and what's imagined become more porous. This is why we dream in darkness, why we process our experiences and emotions in the dark hours of the night. Darkness is where the unconscious mind can finally speak without being shouted down by the bright, busy, rational consciousness that governs our daylight hours. And this is why dark stories like the one we just shared, can be so conducive to sleep. They acknowledge this truth about darkness and about ourselves. They meet us in the place we already are, that liminal space between waking and sleeping, between the rational and the dreamlike. Consider how different the Lighthouse Keeper's story would be if we tried to tell it in full sunlight, with every detail explained, every strange occurrence given a rational cause, every ambiguity resolved. It would lose something essential, wouldn't it? The story needs its darkness, its mysteries, its unanswered questions. Just as we need our darkness, our dreams, our own unresolved mysteries. In sleep research, scientists have discovered that certain types of content are actually more effective at helping people fall asleep than silence or pleasant imagery. Stories with a moderate level of engagement, not too exciting, not too boring, can help the mind gradually disengage from waking consciousness. And stories that acknowledge the strangeness of existence, the mystery of consciousness itself, seem particularly effective. Why? Perhaps because they give us permission to let go of the need to understand and control everything. Perhaps because they model for us what we must do to fall asleep, surrender to uncertainty, release our grip on the waking world, allow ourselves to drift into a state where logic loosens and the impossible becomes possible. Think about what happens when you resist sleep. You lie there, trying to force it, thinking about all the reasons you need to sleep, worrying about how tired you'll be tomorrow if you don't sleep. And the harder you try, the more awake you become. Sleep cannot be conquered or commanded. It can only be invited, allowed, surrendered to. This is what darkness teaches us. And this is what dark stories teach us. Surrender. Release. Trust. The woman in the water, the ghost who knocked on Thomas Cranach's door, the mystery of what happened in those final hours. These are not problems to be solved. They're experiences to be absorbed, felt, contemplated, and then released. Let them go. Let them drift away into the darkness, taking with them some of your own need to understand, to control, to remain vigilantly alert. Take a breath with me now. A slow, deep breath. Feel your chest rise, your lungs fill. Hold it for a moment. And now release it, long and slow, letting go of any tension you might be holding, any resistance, any effort. The darkness around you is patient. It's been waiting for you, just as it waits for all of us every night. It asks nothing of you except that you stop fighting it. That you allow yourself to rest in it, to be held by it, the way a swimmer can finally relax and float when they stop struggling against the water. You are safe in this darkness. Safer, perhaps, than you are in the bright light of day, where there are so many demands on your attention, so many things requiring your energy and focus. Here in the darkness, with only these stories and my voice for company, you can finally put down all those burdens. You can simply be. Simply breathe. Simply drift. And if you find yourself thinking about Thomas Cranach, standing on those rocks, making his choice to wade into the dark water, don't analyze it. Don't try to understand what it means or what you would have done in his place. Just let the image rest in your mind, the way a smooth stone rests at the bottom of a deep pool. It's there. It exists. That's enough. Soon, I'll tell you another story. But for now, in this pause between tales, just rest. Let your breathing slow even further. Feel the weight of your body against the bed, supported, held. Notice how heavy your limbs have become. Notice how your thoughts are starting to soften and blur at the edges, the way objects blur in darkness, losing their sharp boundaries. This is right. This is how it should be. The darkness is not your enemy. Fear is not your enemy. Stories are not your enemy. They're all guides, all helpers, all companions on this nightly journey into sleep. And I'm here with you. I'll continue to be here, a voice in the darkness, leading you deeper and deeper into the quiet, into the rest you came here seeking. Are you ready for another tale? It's waiting for us, just ahead, like a door opening into another room. But there's no hurry. We have all night. Time moves differently in darkness. Minutes stretch and hours compress. Let yourself exist in this eternal present, where there's no past to regret and no future to worry about. Only now. Only this. Only the darkness and the story and the slow, steady rhythm of your breath. Section 4. The apartment on Thornwood Lane. Maya found the apartment through an ad in a newspaper. This was unusual in itself. Most people used websites now, apps on their phones, algorithms that matched them with properties based on their preferences and budget. But Maya preferred the tangible quality of newspaper ads, the feel of paper between her fingers, the finality of ink on newsprint. The ad was simple. 1BR apt, Thornwood Lane. Quiet. Affordable. Available immediately. There was a phone number, nothing else. No photos, no description of amenities, no mention of lease terms or deposit requirements. Just those few words and a number. Maya called from the coffee shop where she spent most of her days, working on her laptop, her coffee growing cold while she designed websites for clients she'd never met. The voice that answered was elderly, a woman who spoke slowly and precisely, as if choosing each word with great care. "You're calling about the apartment?" "Yes," Maya said. "Is it still available?" "It is." "When would you like to see it?" They arranged a viewing for that evening. The woman, Mrs. Chin, she'd said her name was, gave Maya the address and apartment number, for B, and told her she'd meet her there at 7 o'clock. Then she hung up, leaving Maya with the odd feeling that something important had just been decided, though she wasn't sure what. Thornwood Lane was in an older part of the city, where the buildings were pre-war brick and stone, where trees still lined the sidewalks and threw deep shadows across the pavement. Maya arrived 15 minutes early and stood outside the building, looking up at its facade. 5 stories, narrow windows, a sense of solidity and permanence that newer buildings lacked. It looked, Maya thought, like a building that had seen things, that held stories in its bones. Mrs. Chin appeared exactly at 7, materializing on the sidewalk beside Maya with such suddenness that Maya actually jumped. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Chin said, though she didn't sound sorry. "I didn't mean to startle you. Shall we go up?" She was older than her voice had suggested, perhaps in her 80s, dressed in a dark coat despite the mild evening. Her face was kind but unreadable, like a worn photograph of someone who was beautiful once, years ago. They climbed the stairs, no elevator, Mrs. Chin informed her, past apartments from which Maya could hear muffled sounds of life, television dialogue, cooking smells, a baby crying, someone practicing scales on a piano. Normal things. Comforting things. But by the time they reached the 4th floor, the sounds had faded. The hallway was silent and dim, lit by bulbs that seemed too weak for their fixtures. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hall. Mrs. Chen unlocked it with an old-fashioned key and pushed the door open. "Please," she said, gesturing for Maya to enter first. The apartment was smaller than Maya had expected, but not uncomfortably so. One main room that served as living space, with high ceilings and large windows that looked out onto the street below. A small kitchen in an alcove. A bedroom barely large enough for a bed. A bathroom with vintage fixtures that had been maintained beautifully, old but clean, porcelain that gleamed even in the dim light. But what struck Maya most was the silence. Standing in that apartment, she couldn't hear any of the sounds from the building. No neighbors, no traffic from the street, nothing. Just a deep, cottony silence that seemed to press against her eardrums. "It's very quiet," she said. "Yes," Mrs. Chen agreed. "The walls are thick. Solid construction. People appreciate the privacy." Maya walked to the windows. The street below looked ordinary enough. Parked cars, streetlights beginning to glow as evening deepened, a man walking a dog. But something felt off about the view, though she couldn't have said exactly what. The perspective, maybe. Or the quality of the light. Something. "How much is the rent?" Maya asked, turning back to Mrs. Chen. The amount Mrs. Chen quoted was absurdly low, perhaps half what Maya had been expecting to pay for anything in this neighborhood. She must have looked surprised because Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "The owner is more interested in having the right tenant than in maximizing profit," she said. "Someone quiet. Someone who appreciates solitude. Someone who won't cause problems." "I'm very quiet," Maya assured her. This was true. She worked from home, had few friends, preferred her own company to most social situations. She'd been looking for a place that felt separate, apart, a sanctuary from the world. This apartment, with its thick walls and deep silence, seemed perfect. "I can see that," Mrs. Chen said, studying Maya with those unreadable eyes. "When would you like to move in?" "As soon as possible." "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow will be fine." They went through the paperwork quickly, too quickly, Maya thought later. There was no credit check, no references required, just a simple lease agreement and the first month's rent in cash. Mrs. Chen gave Maya the key, shook her hand with cool, dry fingers, and left. Maya stood alone in the apartment, in that profound silence, and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not unease exactly. More like recognition, as if some part of her had been expecting to find this place, had been looking for it without knowing she was looking. She moved in the next day. She didn't have much: a bed, a desk, her clothes, her computer equipment, boxes of books. It took only one trip in a borrowed van. By evening, she was unpacked and sitting at her desk by the window, working on a client's website, feeling more settled than she had in years. The first week passed normally. Maya worked, ate simple meals in her kitchen, read before sleeping. The silence of the apartment remained absolute. She never heard her neighbors, though she knew they must exist. Sometimes she'd see someone in the hallway when she went out for groceries, but they never spoke, never made eye contact. It was as if everyone in the building had an unspoken agreement to pretend they were all completely alone. This suited Maya fine. She'd come here for solitude, after all. But on the 8th night, she woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of someone crying. It was soft, muffled, but unmistakable. A woman sobbing, the sound coming from somewhere nearby. Maya lay in her bed, listening, trying to determine the direction. Was it coming from the apartment above her? Below? Through the walls? The crying continued for perhaps 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Maya lay awake for a long time afterward, staring at her ceiling, before finally drifting back to sleep. She heard it again the next night. And the night after that. Always at 3 in the morning, always lasting around 10 minutes, always stopping with the same sudden finality. Maya began to dread the sound, would lie awake from 2:30 onward, tense and waiting, knowing it would come. On the 4th night, she got up and walked through her apartment, trying to locate the source. The sound seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, as if it were coming from the walls themselves, or from some space between the walls, a dimension slightly separate from the one she inhabited. She knocked on the wall. "Hello? Are you all right?" The crying stopped instantly. Silence rushed back in, heavy and absolute. Maya stood in her dark apartment, hands still raised to the wall, and felt the first real stirring of unease. She went back to bed but didn't sleep. The next day, she worked at the coffee shop instead of at home, putting off her return to the apartment until evening. When she finally climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, she found herself walking slowly, reluctantly. The hallway seemed darker than usual, the silence more oppressive. She unlocked her door and stood on the threshold, looking into her apartment. It looked exactly as she'd left it, her desk, her books, her bed neatly made. Normal. Ordinary. Safe. But it didn't feel safe. Not anymore. Maya forced herself inside, locked the door behind her. She made dinner, though she had no appetite. She tried to work but couldn't concentrate. Finally, she got ready for bed, though it was barely 9 o'clock. Better to sleep early, she thought, before 3 a.m. came around. But she didn't sleep. She lay in her bed, watching the clock, watching the hours creep toward 3. And at 3 o'clock exactly, the crying began. This time, Maya was ready. She got up immediately and went to her door, pressed her ear against it. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway. She checked the bathroom, the kitchen, the main room. The crying seemed to be everywhere, all around her, as if the apartment itself were weeping. "Please," Maya said aloud, her voice shaking slightly. "Please tell me what's wrong. Let me help you." The crying changed. It became louder, more anguished, less like crying and more like wailing. The sound filled the apartment, filled Maya's head, unbearable in its grief. She covered her ears, but it made no difference. The sound was inside her somehow, reverberating in her bones. And then, as suddenly as it had intensified, it stopped. In the silence that followed, Maya heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, soft footsteps, coming from her bedroom. She turned, heart hammering, and saw a figure standing in the doorway of her bedroom. A woman, dressed in a nightgown, her face in shadow. She was crying, no sound now, but tears streaming down her cheeks, visible even in the darkness. Maya's mouth opened but no words came out. She stood frozen, watching the woman watch her. And then the woman spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you take my home?" Maya blinked, and the woman was gone. Just gone, as if she'd never been there. The bedroom doorway was empty, the apartment silent. Maya didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat on her couch, all the lights on, waiting for dawn. When morning finally came, she called Mrs. Chin. "The apartment," Maya said when Mrs. Chin answered. Did something happen here? To the previous tenant?" There was a long pause. Then Mrs. Chin said, "Why do you ask? I keep hearing crying. And last night I saw..." Maya trailed off. How could she explain what she'd seen? "I saw someone. A woman." Another pause. Then, "Would you like to break your lease?" I don't know. I just want to understand what's happening. Some places hold memories," Mrs. Chin said carefully. "The previous tenant lived there for 20 years. She was very attached to the apartment. She died there, in fact. In her sleep. Peaceful, the coroner said. But perhaps some part of her didn't want to leave." Maya's grip on her phone tightened. "You didn't think that was worth mentioning before I moved in? Would you have taken the apartment if I had?" "No. Exactly. And you needed a home, didn't you? You needed a place that was quiet, separate, somewhere you could be alone. The apartment offers that. It offers solitude. Perfect solitude. The previous tenant understood that. She valued it so much she didn't want to leave, even after death." "That's insane," Maya whispered. "Is it? You came here looking for isolation, for silence, for a retreat from the world. The apartment gives you exactly that. The walls are thick. No sound gets in or out. You can be completely alone there. Isn't that what you wanted? Not like this. Not with a ghost." "She's not a ghost," Mrs. Chin said, and something in her voice made Maya's skin prickle. "She's a memory. The apartment's memory of someone who loved it very much. And memories can't hurt you. They can only make you remember things you might prefer to forget." "What things?" "That's for you to discover. Or not. The choice is yours. You can leave, break the lease, go somewhere else. Or you can stay. Learn to coexist with the apartment's memories. Learn what they have to teach you. This is crazy." Maya said. Yes, Mrs. Chen agreed. Most true things are. She hung up. Maya sat in her apartment, the woman's apartment. She couldn't help thinking now, and tried to decide what to do. She could leave. Pack up her things, find another place, pretend this had never happened. But where would she go? Back to the exhausting hunt for housing, the compromises, the noise, the constant intrusion of other people's lives? She'd been so relieved to find this place, this perfect quiet space. Could she give it up so easily? And there was something else, something she was reluctant to acknowledge even to herself. She was curious. What did Mrs. Chen mean about memories making you remember things you'd prefer to forget? What could a ghost, or a memory, or whatever the woman in her apartment was, teach her? That night, Maya didn't try to sleep. She sat up, waiting for 3 o'clock. When the crying began, she didn't cover her ears or call out. She just listened. And as she listened, something strange happened. The crying began to sound familiar. Not in the sense that she'd heard it before, though she had, now, multiple times. But familiar in a deeper way. As if she recognized the emotion behind it, the particular quality of grief and loneliness that produced those sounds. It was how she'd cried, Maya realized with a shock. In the months after her mother died, when Maya was 17. She'd locked herself in her bedroom and cried like that, deep, wrenching sobs that felt like they might tear her apart. Cried alone because there was no one else, because her father had left years before, and she had no siblings, no close friends, no one who could possibly understand the vast empty space her mother's death had left in her life. She'd learned to be alone then. Learned to prefer it even. Learned that solitude was safer than connection, that walls were better than bridges, that silence was preferable to the risk of being heard and still remaining alone. The crying stopped. In the silence that followed, Maya felt something shift inside her. A recognition. An understanding. The woman appeared again, standing in the middle of the room now, close enough that Maya could see her face clearly for the first time. She was middle-aged, ordinary-looking, with sad eyes and tear-stained cheeks. She looked at Maya with something like compassion. "You understand now," she said. It wasn't a question. "You were alone," Maya said. "Like me. I chose to be alone. I thought it was safer. Simpler. But in the end, I was so alone I didn't even have anyone to tell when I was dying. I lay in that bed for 3 days before Mrs. Chen came and found me. 3 days, and no one noticed I was gone. That's what perfect solitude means. That's what these thick walls and this deep silence give you. Complete isolation. Is that really what you want?" Maya felt tears on her own cheeks now. "I don't know." "Then think about it. You still have time. You're still alive, still young enough to make different choices. I'm just a memory now, just an echo of someone who chose wrong. Don't let this apartment turn you into another echo." "But I like being alone," Maya protested. "Do you? Or are you just afraid of the alternative?" Maya had no answer for that. The woman faded slowly, like mist burning off in morning sun, until Maya was alone again in her silent apartment. But the silence felt different now. Less like peace and more like absence. Less like sanctuary and more like a tomb. Maya didn't sleep that night either. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop and started making a list. Friends she'd lost touch with. Family members she hadn't called in months. Invitations she'd declined. Connections she'd allowed to wither. The list grew longer and longer as the night progressed. At dawn, she picked up her phone and made the first call. Her cousin, whose wedding she'd skipped last year, claiming she was too busy with work. The cousin answered on the third ring, sleepy and confused. "Maya? Is everything okay? I'm sorry," Maya said. "About the wedding. About not being there. About being a terrible cousin. Can we have coffee sometime? Catch up?" There was a pause, then her cousin's voice, warmer now. "I'd like that. I've missed you, Maya." They talked for 10 minutes, made plans for the following week. When Maya hung up, she felt something loosening in her chest, some knot of tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. The crying didn't come that night, or the next night, or the night after that. A week later, Maya saw Mrs. Chin in the hallway. The old woman nodded to her. "You're still here," she observed. "Yes," Maya said. "But I'm leaving soon. I found a place with roommates. 2 women I met through a friend. It'll be louder, more chaotic, less private. You're choosing that? After this?" "Because of this," Maya corrected. "The apartment taught me something. Or the woman, the memory, taught me something. That solitude and isolation aren't the same thing. That silence can be restful or suffocating depending on what you're silent from. That thick walls can be protection or prison." Mrs. Chin smiled, a real smile this time, sad and knowing. She would be glad to hear that. She spent 20 years learning that lesson. Better that you learned it in 2 weeks. Will she be alright? The woman in the apartment? "She's a memory," Mrs. Chin said. "She'll fade eventually. Memories always do. But perhaps she'll fade more peacefully now, knowing she taught someone the lesson she learned too late to use herself." Maya moved out at the end of the month. As she carried the last box down the stairs, she paused on the 4th floor landing and looked back at 4B. The door was closed, the hallway silent as always. But she thought she saw, just for a moment, a flicker of movement behind the window, a figure waving goodbye. She waved back. Then she continued down the stairs, out of the building, into the bright morning where her new roommates were waiting with a van and coffee and the promise of noise and life and the beautiful, messy complexity of not being completely alone. The apartment on Thornwood Lane still stands. It's still available, periodically, when the current tenant decides to leave. Mrs. Chin still shows it, still tells prospective renters about the thick walls and deep silence. Some people take it. Some people don't. And those who take it either leave quickly, frightened by the crying woman, or stay long enough to learn what she's trying to teach them. Most leave eventually. They learn the lesson and move on to louder, messier, more connected lives. But occasionally, someone stays. Someone who wants the perfect solitude more than anything, who craves the silence more than they fear the loneliness. And eventually they become part of the apartment too. Another memory in the walls. Another voice crying at 3 in the morning, trying to warn the next tenant before it's too late. Mrs. Chin is patient. She has time. And there are always people looking for apartments, for quiet places, for perfect solitude. She'll keep showing 4B, keep offering it to those who need its particular lesson. Because sometimes the only way to learn what you really need is to get exactly what you think you want, and discover that it's not enough. That it was never going to be enough. That human beings are not meant for perfect isolation, no matter how much safer it seems than the risk of connection. The apartment knows this. The woman in the apartment knows this. Mrs. Chin knows this. And now so do you.